Welcome to Turkish-American TV. I am Özge Övün Sert. Today we have two studio guests, Ceylan and Clay Conger. They are actually from Washington DC area, but they moved out and they have very interesting story to tell us today. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
So I would like you to introduce yourself first for our audience.
Sure. Well, my name is Clay Conger, and I was born in Washington, D.C. area, and about 3 years ago moved to L.A. I'm a musician, I do YouTube movie reviews, and I'm a writer as well. And I'm currently working on the book with my sister over here.
Yes, I am Ceylan. I'm Clay's older sister, and I live in Brooklyn, New York. And a couple years ago, Clay and I started this project about our grandmother, and we decided to tell her story through a book.
Perfect. Yes, that's the interesting story starts there. So your grandma is actually from Turkey.
Yes.
Yes.
And she's Jewish, and she got married to a Turkish Muslim man.
Mm-hmm.
And how that story began?
So, from what I've been told from various family members, my grandmother was working in her father's dry cleaning store, and my grandfather was working at the American embassy across the street. So one day he went in to do some dry cleaning and met this beautiful young Turkish girl, and they quickly started sending each other some love notes, and eventually they ran off together to Ankara. And so that's where they stayed until they moved with my mother and her siblings to the United States in the 1950s.
Wow, 1950s.
But late, probably 1959, I would say.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our grandmother, Beti, was her name, would usually come over about 3 times a week.
At least.
Maybe.
At the minimum. She would call
Yeah.
my mother from work and say, I have cramps. I need to see my grandchildren.
Yeah.
And she would just come, and she would usually stay 2-3 days. So we had the whole basement arranged for her things, just in case she would stop by.
Right.
Yeah.
She sounds like a very colorful person.
That's putting it lightly. She was a very colorful person, and what was kind of amazing was how many people she affected through her life. I mean, she must have known people across the globe, and everyone was just drawn to her. Yeah, colorful character.
I mean, that also about your book's title is...
How to Host a Turkish Funeral.
Okay, and
Yes.
why is that?
Because my grandmother Beti, she became sick, and she had about 3 weeks left. And so what the family decided was they knew that Beti wanted to be around her family. I mean, that was of prime importance. So she actually came to live with us for 3 weeks. And during those 3 weeks, people from all over came to essentially spend time with her, say goodbye to her, and it became this one big hosting event. I mean, it was kind of like a funeral in itself, but it was also kind of a party at the same time. Just, Turkish music playing constantly, gambling.
Yes.
I mean, it was pretty crazy for those 3 weeks, and it was such an interesting time in our lives that at some point we decided to write a book centering on those 3 weeks and what it was like growing up with her.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how do you remember your grandparents' relationship?
I actually don't remember my grandfather speaking much English. I
No.
think he always spoke to us in Turkish, although we didn't understand the
understand
words
it.
he was saying. We understand the tone that he had. So
Gestures,
and
mannerisms,
gestures.
a lot.
Yeah, and with my grandmother, obviously Turkish food was very much a part of growing up. I don't think we realized until much later in life that we hadn't been exposed to American cuisine. It was probably only until we went to college and we had to go find food ourselves that we realized that not everybody had lamb readily available for us to eat.
A typical dinner was not wonderful lamb followed by mahalabe or burek. We thought that was that was normal for us.
Very nice. And also your mom used to that Turkish cuisine, and she also cooks Turkish food
Yes.
for you guys.
She's an excellent cook.
And also you've been to Turkey,
I have.
right?
Yes.
And you lived there for a while. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So after my undergraduate degree, I was fortunate enough to receive a Fulbright scholarship, and so I moved to Istanbul for a year. and I needed a place to stay for about 3 weeks before I got my bearings and found an apartment. So I actually stayed with some cousins of mine whom I hadn't really met before, because I had only gone to Turkey 1 or 2 times prior to that. So and they don't speak English, and my Turkish is very limited. So we really got to know each other very well, even though we were communicating mostly through gesturing and
Food.
And food.
Food,
Pretty
of
much.
course.
Yeah. So that was a wonderful time.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you have Turkish name.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have 2 Turkish names. Very traditional. And that may make people a little bit warmer to you, like, well, you're Turkish, you have a Turkish name, but you don't speak the language.
Exactly. So when I lived in Turkey, it was very confusing for people because my name was Ceylan. My last name, Conger, was confusing because it seemed like it was Conger. So they said, Ceylan Conger, you should be speaking Turkish. But I think at the same point, it allowed people to really bring me into the fold and take care of me as one of their own.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about a little bit of when are you guys planning to finish this book, promote it, when we can buy from Amazon?
So we should be finishing it in probably just a few months.
Oh, cool.
We already have a lot of it written. We have the outline. We have a good pitch for it and everything. We're also going to do a series of very cute, short, animated videos of our podcast. So what Jalen and I do is we talk on Skype, because she lives in Brooklyn and I live in LA, and we just share stories. Some of them might be in the book, some of them not in the book, just about our family and what it was like growing up. And we're going to turn them into animated videos and put them on YouTube. And that'll be a way to kind of, show people more about our family and growing up in a multicultural environment. Right. And obviously we're still interested in finding publishers for the novel. But we're very excited to finish it and get it out there because we think it's a great story for pretty much anyone to read.
And also, I asked this before, but who does the writing and who does the narrating? Oh, do you remember that? Let's keep this in book, or
It's kind of 50-50.
It is.
We originally came up with the idea. Jalen, almost as a dare, really, told me. She said, Clay, we have so many stories about Beti. We have so many stories about our family. Why don't you just write some of it? And so I did. I just wrote a chapter just of a story that happened when we knew Beti. And then I asked Jalen to do the same thing.
Yeah,
and
so he sent it over to me, and then I wrote a chapter and sent it back to him, said, take that, how do you like it?
Yeah.
And then he sent one back, and so it became kind of sibling rivalry. And that's how the book actually got started.
Yeah, and it was very interesting because I was an English major. I've taken writing classes, and I've been writing short stories and movie reviews and other forms of writing. So my writing had a little bit more of a professional tone to it, but what was great is it was a perfect kind of contrast with Jalen's writing, because Jalen is actually an excellent writer. But it was much more, you are, but it was much more warm, and it was
not too formal.
Yeah, it was more of like a natural storytelling kind of technique that she was using. Yeah. So when the book will be structured that way, it'll be Jalen and I flipping back and forth telling stories about Beti and growing up. And I thought that made for a great novel.
Yeah, it's 2 different voices and 2 different perspectives of what we saw.
Yeah.
During that time.
Very interesting. Okay, you live in LA.
I do.
And you are so much into art, different type of...
Sure, music, film, you name it.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I've been playing music since I was probably about 14, and I've been writing since I was 7, 8 years old or something. It's pretty much been lifelong. And I've been lucky enough to live in a city where there are so many chances to work on projects and collaborate with people. For example, I'm in a band right now. I love playing music live, and I also like composing music for film. In fact, one of the tracks I wrote ended up being in a documentary about Syrian refugees called Waiting at the Door, and which was wonderful to do, and I would love to write music for films and games and other type of projects because it's extremely rewarding. And doing that while working on the book and while working on movie reviews on YouTube, it's exhausting, obviously, multitasking like that, but it's wonderful at the same time.
Yeah, I bet. And we'll also play a little bit of that music we're talking about.
Yeah.
And we were going to provide some YouTube, channels, links for audience if they want to check it online.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting story. How about you?
So I live in New York. Brooklyn is a really creative space. I've just started taking classes throughout the city doing different watercolor and found this passion for painting. And so that is this new project that I'm starting. If we can maybe institute part of that into the book.
Ooh, that'd be nice. She's also an excellent guitar player.
Oh, really?
She is.
Ah,
if she
I
practices.
You brought your guitar here.
Yeah.
But you also studied some kind of art in Turkey?
I did. So I was very curious to see what the contemporary art movement was like in Istanbul, and particularly among women artists. And so that was the theme of the project that I was doing when I was on my Fulbright scholarship. And so when I went, I really didn't know much about the artistic landscape in Turkey, other than there's some wonderful galleries and amazing museums in Istanbul. And when I started traveling around the city and really interviewing people within that community, I found that there is this very vivacious community of women artists in Istanbul particularly. And the work that they're doing is extremely topical, very powerful. And so it was really a privilege to be able to spend time with them and get to know more about their work.
Perfect. Yeah. And do you do painting, or you said, because I know there are lots of Turkish historical painting, miniature and other type of arts.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
With more of the traditional arts?
Traditional
yeah,
arts,
like Ebru in Turkey and things like
yeah.
that. Yeah, it's beautiful. I would love to do Ebru if I can find a class.
I think there are some instructors here. I heard about that.
Yeah.
Okay, very, very interesting story. Thanks for coming today, and we would love to see and read your book on the shelf. Good luck with finding publisher and promoting your book. Ceylan, thank you.
Thank you
and
so
Clay,
much.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.